Hello and welcome to another video. My name is CJ the Populist New Yorker, and today we're going to be looking at what state is going to surprise us in the 2020 election, or more of a what state is going to be the fluke, the state that no one expects to flip either red or blue in 2020. So I've basically decided that up until the election, I'm probably going to release 2 videos a day just because there's some things I want to get out there, some final predictions, House, Senate, and presidential. So stay tuned for those. I'll be releasing those up until Tuesday. But today we're going to be looking at 4 states which I think are the most likely to be the fluke states in the 2020 election. And we'll start with fluke states in favor of Trump. We'll start with the state of Nevada. So current polling in the state of Nevada has Biden up anywhere from 6.4% to 4.6%. So Biden up on average of around 5 points. And there was actually a brief period in April where Trump and Biden were nearly tied, but that has since kind of dissipated. All of the most recent polls have Joe Biden up very comfortably. Of course, you could also note that there weren't a lot of polls taken in the state of Nevada anyway. More attention has been shown to larger states. But if Trump really wants to win the 2020 election, a state like Nevada is definitely a state he wants on his map, because this is a state that could offset a loss in a Wisconsin or in a state like Arizona. This could kind of offset that. So as long as Trump wins the state of Pennsylvania and holds on to the other lean/toss-up states, he can win the presidency. So if this state was to become a surprise in the Trump column, this could be a state that delivers him victory in 2020. Now let's look at the way Nevada voted in the 2016 election. In 2016, Nevada voted for Hillary Clinton by 2.4 percentage points, the narrowest margin it has voted for any presidential candidate, I believe, since 1996. I think Bush won this state by around 3 or 4 both times. Obama won it by 13 in 2008, and then 6 in 2012. 6 or 7, I think. And now in 2020, Hillary Clinton has only won the state by 2.4. So if there's a trend that we've seen since 2008 onward, the state of Nevada has actually moved more to the right. The 2 counties in Nevada that are most important, electorally speaking, are Washoe County, which is home to the city of Reno, and of course Clark County. Now, Republicans haven't won Clark County, I don't think, in decades. However, most Republicans that end up winning the state usually run up the margins here. They only lose it by a few points, in this county at least. And then, of course, they win Washoe County, which kind of solidifies Nevada as red. So if we look at the change from 2012, every single county in Nevada trended more Republican than Democratic from 2012, which is quite telling. Now, if we look at the full results of Nevada, of course, a lot of the vote did go to third parties. 3.3% went to Gary Johnson, 2.6%. Well, we'll just expand the others. 2.6 went to other independent candidates, 0.5 for Darrell Castle, and 0.2% for Rocky De La Fuente, who for some reason runs in literally every election that has ever happened in the last, 15 years, basically. But effectively, we can look at the Senate race as well. Republicans were able to win Washoe County, but not Clark County. In fact, Joe Heck did worse in Clark County than Donald Trump did, and his opponent did about the same as Hillary Clinton. Actually did a little bit worse. Both of the candidates did kind of worse. But this state was the closest of the fluke states that we're going to analyze this time around. So I think, in all honesty, in a Trump victory, this is the most likely state to be the surprise state that Trump wins. Last time the surprise state was the state of Michigan. Nobody really expected Michigan to flip. If we go back to the 2016 map, the fluke in 2016 was the state of Michigan. In 2012, it was actually the state of Virginia. Most people projected the state of Virginia was actually going to go to Mitt Romney, and it didn't. It went to Obama by several points. And of course, if we go back in time to 2008, the fluke state was Indiana. Nobody really expected Indiana to flip. It flipped anyway, which was very surprising because it was a very, very solidly red state. And since 2008, 2012 here, there's a 11-point difference. And of course, in 2016, Trump wins it by a very safe margin of 19 points. So Indiana has stayed consistently safe red. The rest of the fluke states we're going to talk about have been a lot more in play recently. So we just talked about the state of Nevada. If we go back to 2012 again, this was a 7-point margin or so for Obama. He did much better in places like Washoe County and Clark County than Hillary Clinton did, and thus why he carried the state by a larger margin. He was also able to make the rural counties a little bit more competitive, particularly Mineral County, which is not really a population center, but even places like Carson City, 53-44. If we go to 2016, Carson City is 52-38, so much more lopsided. So I guess if you were to rank these, it would be Clark County, Washoe, and then of course Carson City. Now, as I've said before in this video, this is the most likely state to be a fluke if Trump wins. This is the most likely state to flip to him. And with Trump's gains with Latinos, it's very likely, well, I wouldn't say very likely, but out of these 4 states we're entertaining the idea of flipping, I think it's definitely the most likely, which is why I decided to put it first on our list. Of course, polling in Nevada does tend to actually favor Republicans, but I don't really know. Biden could be up by a lot more than we think, or the enthusiasm gap could play a role as well, and Trump could narrowly win the state, or the polls could have just changed their methodology to stop favoring Republicans, because if we go back to 2018, even 2016, Republicans were doing a lot better in the state of Nevada, and I think it was only towards the end where Hillary Clinton kind of came back from doing much more poorly in the polling as compared to the other states she won. Finally, we're going to look at the early vote out of Nevada. 78% of those who cast ballots in 2016 have voted in 2020, and here are the results. So in 2016, 50.8% of the early vote went to Democrats, 40.5% went to Republicans. This time, Democrats hold a narrow lead of 0.5%. Yeah, I think that's 0.5 or, under a point. They hold 46.1 to 45.4. Definitely a big improvement in favor of Republicans. Now, I don't know how popular early voting was in Nevada in 2016, but given that this number is around 78%, I guess we can kind of assume this is around 50, maybe half of the votes cast. So this is definitely good news for Republicans. Of course, we'll see how this actually plays out. If we go to registered party, Democrats still held the lead, 42% to 36.9%. to 40% to 36%. So either way you look at this, Republicans are doing better in the early vote than 2016, and that's something you're not going to see on really mainstream media or companies like 538 or 270 or whatever. They don't really seem to point this out, but I just think if we're being honest here, we would look at these numbers and say they're quite significant. The modeled party, I think, is more accurate because this is kind of basing people's votes on how they voted in the past. So if an independent tends to vote more Republican, I guess they'd get grouped in with Republicans and vice versa. But this has really narrowed up since the last time we looked at this map. It was a little more lopsided. But anyway, that is basically going to be our Nevada analysis. This is definitely the closest of the state, and it's very possible to flip. Trump only has to do slightly better in Clark County and Washoe County, and all it takes is for Biden to do slightly worse. Biden hasn't really paid a lot of attention to the state of Nevada, and that's why a few weeks ago he was actually visiting the state of Nevada, which was a state that previously was in the bag for him. So it does beg the question, were his internal polls in the state of Nevada poor? Perhaps, but we can only find out on November 3rd. The next blue state we're going to entertain the idea of flipping to Trump is the state of Minnesota. Well, I lied. The state of Minnesota was actually the closest state that we're going to talk about in this video. So Trump only lost the state by 1.5 percentage points, and when we look at the trends, nearly all of the state of Minnesota trended more Republican except the Minneapolis metro area. If we go to 2020 polling, we will see that the state of Nevada is a little bit more in favor of Joe Biden than the state of Minnesota is more in favor of Joe Biden than the state of Nevada. The average of all these polls is somewhere probably around 7.9% lead for Joe Biden. But if we look at the polling average, Joe Biden is kind of tapering off a little bit, and a lot of polling agencies have listed this as either likely or lean. I still tend to think Minnesota is going to be lean Democrat, but it's not impossible to see a state like Minnesota flip this time around. Now, a lot of people are saying this is a lost cause for Donald Trump, but since we're entertaining the idea of surprise states, Minnesota definitely has to be on that list. If we look at the early vote out of the state of Minnesota by modeled party, Republicans are doing a little bit worse. So I thought it was better, but I was doing the math in my head. So in 2016, Democrats had a 50% advantage to 35% advantage, 15 points. as opposed to now, which is 46.5 to 30.8. That's around 15.8%. Let's see if they have registered party. They do not, so we can only base it off modeled party. So early voting, for all intensive purposes, is around the same as it was in 2016 in terms of partisan makeup. Actually, Dems are doing a little bit better. So this is definitely out of Nevada and Minnesota, I would definitely say this is less likely to flip. If we go to the 2012 election, Obama won the state of Minnesota only by around 7 points, so actually kind of the same as Nevada, really. And Minnesota ended up getting closer because I think the white working class in Minnesota is a large percentage of the vote. And if we compare this map to this map, there are definitely a lot of differences. There's a lot more blue in the rural areas than there is in 2016. And if we really are to see the urban and rural divide continue to get more partisan, where we have Republicans in rural areas voting more Republican than Democrats in Democratic areas, we could really see a situation where the state of Minnesota stays competitive for a little while. Of course, urban areas are always going to outpace rural areas eventually, barring some shift in these urban areas. But essentially, the state of Minnesota is going to come down to whether rural turnout has been maxed out for President Trump, or if the urban areas can outpace them with Democratic growth. So we're really going to have to see what happens on November 3rd. Of course, I'll be making my official prediction, which will include all of the states on the map, sometime before the election, ideally probably Monday, November 2nd, just so I have as much data before the election as possible to predict this state. So we looked at the early vote. We looked at, of course, the 2012 results and the polling. Minnesota is definitely the lesser of the two states, despite it having a narrow margin. It is polling much more friendlier to Joe Biden than the state of Nevada. Of course, white voters have been leaving Trump at a higher rate than Latino voters have. In fact, Latino voters, by even people like Nate Silver admit, are moving more to the right, which in a state like Nevada could mean everything, and possibly flip the state depending on turnout. So now that we've entertained the two blue states that can flip to Donald Trump if he happens to win the presidency, we can look at two red states that could flip to Joe Biden that many people are not really expecting. Of course, you have some Democrats that are very excited about these two states, Georgia and Texas, but realistically, most people are paying attention to the Rust Belt and Arizona. But we're not going to talk about those states because everyone expects those states to be, all over the place. First, we're going to look at the state of Georgia. So out of all of these states, Minnesota, Nevada, Georgia's margin is a 5.1% margin. So, of course, the blue states going to red had much closer margins than the red states going blue. Of course, if we look at the breakdown by county, the areas that swung most to the left are the Atlanta metro area, particularly places of Cobb and Gwinnett County, and even these areas like Forsyth County and Cherokee County. These are solid red counties that are still solid red, but moved a tad bit more in the blue direction. Of course, places like Savannah also moved a little bit more Democratic. But the state of Georgia is a state that Trump did win by 5.1 points. So I think it'll be a little bit harder for Joe Biden to win a state like Georgia. But you could also argue it'd be harder for Trump to win Minnesota or Nevada based on the national polling and how he's much more behind than he was last time. But we're going to look at some 2020 polls to analyze how possible a Biden win in the state of Georgia actually is. So looking at these statewide polls, it is actually pretty telling. Biden is actually up in these polls. Unlike Nevada, unlike Minnesota, Biden is actually up in the aggregate in the state of Georgia. So, Biden is up 1.4% in the 538 and 270 aggregates. He's tied in the RCP aggregate, and the average, of course, is 0.9. So less than a point. But again, Biden has held a steady lead from September onward overall in polls. He's led in more polls than he didn't. If we go back early on, it's actually kind of all over the place. But Trump was more ahead in the aggregate up until recently. And if we look, of course, at the Target Smart results, this will kind of give us an indication of where Georgia is at right now. So, of course, last time in 2016, Republicans led the early vote by 12 points, or 11.4 or whatever it is, 53 to 41. Now we're looking at a result where Republicans are only leading the early vote 49% to 43%, with 76 So around 3/4 of all Georgians that cast their votes in 2016 have already cast their votes as of the making of this video, October 29th. Well, it's going to be out October 30th, but whatever. So originally, Democrats were ahead in the early vote. Republicans have since taken the lead. Now, the Republican in-person vote could overshadow the gains made by Democrats. But again, the margins like this, 53-41, we only saw Republicans win by 5 points. So with Republicans only up by around 5 points, 6 points, give or take, in the aggregate, where does that lead, Arizona, Georgia? Does that cut Trump's lead in half? Instead of 5.1, is he at around 2 points? Perhaps. Or it could be more dramatic than that, and, possibly Joe Biden could win the state. Now, of course, the areas where he'd really need to overperform better are areas where Stacey Abrams did really well. Of course, Gwinnett, Cobb, basically all the counties in the Atlanta metro that are growing. The rural counties are shrinking. Yes, they're getting more redder, but they're also shrinking, so they're becoming less of the population. Areas like Clark County, which is a college area, Augusta, Macon, Columbus, Savannah. These are areas that have only gotten more bluer, and these are the population centers in Georgia. The only thing that really saves Trump and Republicans in the state of Georgia is how red the rural counties are, particularly in North Georgia, the ex-urban counties of Atlanta, which have a decent amount of population and are very, very solidly red. So if Joe Biden is going to have any chance at winning the state, he really needs to do better among the Atlanta metro area. And in fact, if we could look at how Fulton County has voted. All right, so if we look at Fulton County, which is where Atlanta is, this will be pretty telling, because if a lot of the vote in Fulton is in, that means Democrats don't have as much room to grow. Okie dokie. So it doesn't actually tell us the percentage. But in terms of Fulton County as a whole, Fulton County has gotten bluer. And, of course, the early vote has increased. But not, I'd say, as starkly as it did for the state of Georgia as a whole. So that could bode better news for Republicans. But overall, Republicans are doing worse in Fulton County. We can expect them to do worse in the metro area. The only way that can really be made up is in the ex-urban counties. So can Georgia really be a fluke? Well, in 2018, Stacey Abrams only lost her gubernatorial bid, I believe, by 1.2 or 1.4%. It was a very narrow margin, and her almost victory dragged up all the down-ballot Democrats in Georgia and made the metro area a lot bluer. So if trends continue, it would naturally be expected for Biden to win this state in 2020. If we look at the 2012 results, Georgia was not nearly as competitive. Mitt Romney won the state by around 8 points. He won Gwinnett, he won Cobb County, he won Henry County. These are all counties that Trump lost. Gwinnett, probably the most dramatic, a 6-point loss. Mitt Romney won this by nearly 10 points. So these are areas where Mitt Romney was more favorable in the suburbs. This just goes to show you that Republicans have been doing worse in the suburbs. Sure, a lot of these rural counties got a lot redder, these two in particular. But again, if Biden is going to win the state of Georgia, he's really going to need to target the metro area here, and I think it is possible. The year 2020 has been full of surprises. And it's very possible that if Biden does maintain his polling lead as the actual result, or even overperforms his polls, he could very likely win the state of Georgia and even perhaps bring Jon Ossoff up with him, although I think the latter is much more unlikely, but it is possible. The last state we're going to entertain flipping is, of course, the state of Texas, the state that Democrats have dreamed of flipping for years now, probably decades really, ever since it went safely red. And, has since trended more leftward again. If we look at the polling aggregate, Trump is only up on average by around 2 points when you average these all together, maybe 1 point, like 2 points or so. So we could definitely see a scenario where if Biden just overperforms his polls by 3 points, he wins in the state of Texas. If we look at the 2016 results, Texas was only a 9-point margin for President Trump. We look at, of course, the 2012 election. Mitt Romney won the state of Texas by 15 points. So a very, very stark difference between the two. Of course, Mitt Romney did much better in Dallas. Tarrant County effectively became the bellwether county of Texas. It's basically the indicator of the margin. So 57-41, 57-41. If we go to 2016. 51-43. Tarrant County voted a little bit more blue than Texas, but it was roughly around the average. And I expect the same thing to happen this election. Tarrant County stayed red. If Biden wants to win Texas, he needs to flip Tarrant County, and he probably needs to flip counties like Denton and Collin County as well. And that altogether would probably be just enough for him to flip the state of Texas, all else being equal. Of course, he could do better in Harris County, Bexar County, and he could probably chip away at some rural margins here, and that, of course, would do very well for him. We could look at the shifts from 2012, and this is pretty remarkable. I forget what highway this is, but this is I something, and basically it's been getting more bluer because this is where most of the population growth in Texas is. You know, the Houston suburbs have moved a lot more Democratic. The Austin metro area, Fort Worth, Dallas Metroplex, and of course El Paso. But El Paso's been blue for a long time, so that's not surprising. Again, El Paso was really blue in 2012 too. Not at all surprising. The last thing we're going to look at for the state of Texas is the early vote and see if Democrats are improving there or if they're doing worse. Why can't I find Texas? There we go. All right, so the early vote is around the same as we saw it last time we did the early vote in Texas. 90% of Texans that voted in 2016 have already voted, and here's where the early vote stands. Republicans in 2016 led the early vote by around 11 points. This time they lead it by around 12. So Republicans marginally improving their early vote totals. Of course, we can't check by party because Texas doesn't register voters by party. They're all technically unaffiliated. But the modeled party gives us the best glimpse we have at the state of Texas. And right now, Republicans are actually improving a bit on their mail-in vote total. And that could just be because more people are voting by mail, and maybe by election day we won't see a dramatic shift to the right like we might see in other states. But it is also possible that Republicans are doing slightly better. So, of course, out of all of the states that could possibly be flukes, I think Texas is the most unlikely for Biden. I think Minnesota is, of course, the most unlikely for Trump, the most likely for Biden, Georgia, and the most likely for Trump, Nevada. So I guess we really will find out at the end of the day if there is a surprise state, if any of these states flip, or if we have a more boring kind of election map where these states kind of stay the same, or if we see these states kind of project their trends. Minnesota, long-term trend trending more red. Nevada, trending more red. Texas and Georgia trending more blue long term. We'll see if the 2020 election plays these trends out, or if these states do flip and it turns out not to really be a trend, but a fluke election as a whole, and Biden just winning because of the anti-Trump factor. Anyway, guys, I hope you enjoyed this video. Please leave a thumbs up if you enjoyed. Please subscribe to the channel, hit the bell notification so you don't miss any new videos I put out. I'm going to be putting out a lot more videos this coming week due to the proximity of Election Day. We're going to have probably 2 videos a day. That's my aim anyway. So be sure to check those out and share these videos with friends or whoever. Get the channel out there. We want to grow this channel. Thank you very much for watching, and I hope to see you in the next video.